So today we're cycling from Dingle to Tralee via the Conor Pass. That's on the R560. It's about 52 kilometres in all. It's mostly flat, except of course for that one big climb at the start, which is going up the Conor Pass. Conor Pass is peaks at 456 metres. That's where the car park is, at 456 metres at the top, and that makes it pretty much the highest surface mountain pass in Ireland. Now, certainly not as impressive as what you might find in the Pyrenees or the Alps, but you are coming up from near sea level, so it is a fair old cycle up. The ascent is an average of 6.3%, but I suspect sections of it are pushing 10 or 12% as you get up towards the top. As you can see, this initial section is much more gentle. Apart from the main road, you can also take that lane on the left. I would say it's very bumpy. I have cycled down it, and here's the proof though. That's on a previous trip where I was doing the Conor Pass from the other side. Today, however, I stuck to the main road, and it's much easier and much smoother. Now, you'll notice there's relatively little traffic on the road. The reason for that is I'm doing it first thing in the morning. I set off from the Rainbow Hostel as early as I could in Dingle, a little bit later than I'd intended because I was camping in the back, and it turns out they actually locked the kitchen at night. My breakfast was in the kitchen, so I did have to wait for somebody to get up. That's Dingle there, right back down the hill in the distance. Here's another look at it, and then we can zoom in and see it again. It's really sort of very much dominated by the Conor Pass. So the Conor Pass is, in Irish, the name means the road on Conor, so it's not actually named after Conor. However, I have also seen accounts that say it is named after a king called Conor, but I think those accounts always exist. It's also yet another War of Independence site. There was an ambush by the IRA on the RIC here in 1921 when they ambushed a car with the district inspector in it. 2 constables were killed in the ambush, and the district inspector and another constable were captured but were then released. So up here at the Conor Pass car park, you've got this great view of the Corrie Lakes, looking down towards Mount Bandon. And this is now a national park. In fact, I think of this year, the government bought a big package of land up here at the Conor Pass and added it to the Skelligs and to some of the beaches and offshore coasts where sharks breed. So there's a big combined Conor Pass. They say from up here, you on a clear day, and it was fairly clear, you can see Loop Head, and I've even seen a claim that you can see as far as the Aran Islands, but that is Mount Brandon there. And here we see back down towards Dingle. I was here on a beautifully clear day, but I've also been here on a not clear day, so that's what it looks like on a not clear day. But on a good day, that's your view of the Corrie Lakes looking back down. And this is the other side of that car park where, again, we're looking back down towards Dingle. That's Dingle there at the very bottom of the hill. For breakfast this morning, I decided to treat myself to a little Conor Pass. Very tasty it was too. Join me as we descend the Conor Pass. I thought for the descent I'd leave the sound and video running for parts. As you can see, that is a narrow descent, and I'm taking it fairly cautiously with the blind corners and everything else. But it's safe enough really for cycling. Just keep your wits about you. As always in Ireland, in particular for big agricultural machinery, sometimes driven by teenagers, quite legally too. Alright. There are a couple of stopping places on the descent. This is the next one coming up here, which is the little car park at the Pedlar's Lake viewing point. Basically, if you climb the slope on the right, very steep, there is a lake up there and a waterfall on the way to it. Do be careful though, there have been fatal accidents in this area with people falling off some of these steep ascents. The road itself, I've said was built in just after the famine. I suspect there was already an existing dirt route that was running up this way because it was the way fish was being brought from Dingle all the way up to Tralee before the national road was built. We'll be passing that in a while. And initially the road apparently was quite rough with a load of overhangs as we're coming through there, but those fell basically in the period after it was built one by one on. So we get the relatively clear ascent it is at the moment. But again, probably not the sort of thing you want to be doing in a big camper van or anything similar. Absolutely fine on a bicycle though. There is a great ghost story about the fish being brought to market. So the fishermen catching the fish at Dingle, bringing it up to Tralee. That was an overnight trip. And on the night part of the journey down at the church that's coming up ahead of us, we'll talk about that when we get there was a ghost that used to demand a toll from the fishermen. Now one night some of the fishermen had stopped in a local pub, were relatively drunk and were feeling heroic as part of that, and so when the ghost appeared they leapt up and they grabbed it, and it turned out to be a woman. And no sooner had they grabbed the ghost than the husband stuck his head up from behind the hedge, and basically the ghost apparently was their little scheme for getting some free fish on the way to market, because they'd stop the fisherman and then the fisherman would pay the ghost a toll in order to be allowed to push on ahead. Here we are at Kylemore Cross, so this is the turn off on Clochon. Here's the view down from above to that, and I'll talk about that and that climb in a moment, but here's the bottom. Oh, that was the Conor Pass. It's about 400 metres above sea level, and you basically go up from sea level on the Dingle side and pretty close to sea level on this side. The Dingle side might be the tougher of the two to cycle up. I've done both, it felt harder, but I think the descent is much more fun on this side with those the single track S-bends near the top. Quite exciting to be coming down and seeing what's coming ahead of you. But glad I did that, and also glad I did it in the early morning. No traffic going up, as you'll have noticed, but quite a few cars as I was doing the descent, but no real problems with that. But you can see how if it was a busy day it would be unpleasant, and you can also see why they tell people not to try driving vans up, because if you meet two vans in the middle you're in trouble. As we hit the road again, here's the view again from the side of Mount Bandon down towards Clochon. Now, the reason I'm showing you that view is I want to talk about Mount Bandon for a bit. So it's another one of those holy mountains in Kerry that there were ascents going back into the Bronze Age and perhaps into the Neolithic. They're all kind of similar spiky mountains, and there's a few of those scattered around Ireland. I've talked about that in other videos around particularly around marking Lughnasadh, which is at the start of August. Now, Bandon today has got a Stations of the Cross, like many of these mountains do, going up to the top of it. I think that route might go up from near the car park, but there is another route you can climb it, which is much more difficult, but is really quite spectacular, and that's by taking that turn down towards Clochon and then going to a small place called, I think it's Páirc Grotto, and there's a small car park there. And if you go to the car park there, what you can basically do is you can walk the shoulder of the mountain up to Bandon itself. You go by the site of a World War II, I think it's a B-52 crashed up there, past a whole string of these absolutely stunning Corrie lakes, and then finally you get to what is a very, very steep ascent. It's almost climbing, to be honest, which gets you right up to the summit itself. And I have done that. So let's have a look from a distance. So as you approach, you're basically walking into this absolute wall of rock. It looks like it's completely vertical, but it turns out there are actually some goat tracks, and they're basically what you follow to the top. You get an idea of the scale of that scramble up from here. As you go up, you've got these fantastic views from the top back down towards the Corrie Lakes. And one of my big regrets, in fact, is that when I got back down, I didn't just go and have a swim in them. Because it's certainly one of the most impressive climbs I've done in Ireland. It's easier than Caherconree, but it is technically difficult. You probably don't need a guide. We did it unguided the day we did it. and it was fine. But if you're not used to hiking with a bit of a technical challenge to it, it might be no harm. Here's another shot again, looking back towards Brandon there. So Brandon itself is named after Brandon the Navigator, so a monk who supposedly found America, in the first millennium. However, I've also seen it said that in fact it could be named after an older god called Bran, and perhaps as is often the case, you got a process of Christianization where that older god became the monk and became the navigator. It does make sense that it is a navigation landmark. It is the most westerly point of mainland Ireland and southwesterly bit. If you were lost out at sea, then Bandon would be the thing you would spot and perhaps find your way home by. So it's not particularly surprising it's seen of considerable significance. Here we're coming up to Killiney burial ground. I think this might be where this ghost story is related to. I stopped off there and I spotted this interesting stone cross, and I thought, that looks like it's much older than the church itself. And yeah, when I checked the local Castlegregory history page, which is excellent, I've used that for material here, it turns out that cross is much older. There's a second one in there somewhere as well, and it is probably a very, very early example of a high cross. So before they've really put much of the decorative relief that was going to come in there later was there before the church. There's various local stories about how it survived in that spot, but I'll leave you to have a look at that page itself. I think it's castlegregory.com. Google Castlegregory though, and you'll find it. And as it turns out, this summer I was going to be encountering a number of high crosses, but if you give a subscribe to the channel at this point, you'll get my next sequence of videos, which are a trip down along the Shannon, and that is going to include a trip to Clan MacNoise, which is a very famous old monastic site that was active in Ireland from about the 5th century to about the 11th century, and that has 3 stupendous high crosses you can visit there. So if you've been following me on Instagram or TikTok, indeed, you'll know I visited those places already. What I do is, as I'm traveling, I post live content to both Instagram and TikTok, and then later on I sit down and I edit these YouTube videos together because they take quite a while. So a rare bit of the Eurovelo route where I actually disagree with the way it's been routed, rather than just having a different opinion. Coming up from Dingle to Tralee is tricky because the mountains mostly come down to the sea. So there's most of the time, for long sections, you've got to be stuck on the regional road and then the national road, which, as you can hear behind me, is quite busy. And it does the sensible thing of dipping down to Castlegregory and skipping a couple of kilometres out. But what I'm surprised is that when you come up from Castlegregory, it doesn't do the same thing on the opposite side of the road, which is skip onto basically some of the local roads that run. You probably only miss 5 kilometres or so of the main road, but I have done this previously. I've sticking a link in the comments, in the video description, to where you'll be able to look at that yourself. But those roads are actually pleasant enough. They're not too hilly. They're a little rough in parts, but they're nice. Whereas cycling this just ain't that much fun. So you might want to consider diverting for that part of it. On the other hand, this route does mean you pass that petrol station where I was able to stop for a coffee, a breakfast roll, and they also have a toilet in the back. So that could be a possible bonus and route influencer. Perhaps it was part of the reason for this original route. As you're cycling along here, you're on high ground looking out towards the islands known as the Seven Hogs, and in one of our long-running stories of this particular cycle tour, the Ord, the gunship that was bringing weapons to be used in the 1916 insurrection, anchored off the Seven Hogs and was hoping to get a signal from shore about picking up the guns, but that never actually happened. The guy who was meant to see the signal claims he never saw anything that night. So that was that angle to it. Castlegregory back there is named after somebody called Gregory, as you might imagine, and has a great Game of Thrones story going back to the Desmond Rebellion and the massacre at Smerwick Harbour that we talked a few years ago. So Sir Walter Raleigh and the rest of the officers stopped there at Black Hugh's castle, who was loyal to the crown. However, his wife was not loyal, and she decided to ruin the party by spilling out the wine casks. Black Hugh got angry and murdered her, and then later died as he was awaiting his own execution at a castle up towards Tralee. So yet another grim chapter in that very grim story of the English suppression of the Desmond Rebellion and a lot of the old Irish culture that surrounded it. We're now approaching Camp, which is where the National Road starts, and that mountain behind it is Caherconree, so that is the stone fort of Curie Mac Dara, who was a mythological figure from about 2,000 years ago, the period of the Red Branch Knights and Cuchulainn. He was a very powerful sorcerer, king of Munster, who was a shapeshifter. He turned into a giant, or an enormous dog with an oak tree growing out of his back, and he initially had been an ally of Cuchulainn. The two of them had fought together in Scotland. However, they then fell out over the daughter of the Welsh king, who was Blanchard. Curoy kidnapped her, brought her back to his stone fort up the mountain, and there is a big stone fort up that mountain. He was supposedly able to make it rotate, and he was holding her hostage, but she had arranged with Cuchulainn that she would trick him. So she said his fort wasn't big enough, sent him out, got him to send his soldiers out to gather more stones to make it bigger. Then she poured milk into the stream so it turned white, which is the Finglas, and that was the signal for Cuchulainn to come, and he fought Curie and killed him. However, years later, Curie's poet got his revenge when he saw her working along a cliff path, grabbed her by the hand, and the two of them jumped off the cliff and both died. And there is a grave at the foot of that mountain that is supposedly that point. That is a lot of mythological history for that place. Apparently it's one of the oldest place names in Ireland. There's records of it going back, I think, to about the 10th century. Now, into the right here, there is a even older church ruin, which is about 6th century. It's quite hard to get to. As far as I can make out, you'd probably need to walk the Dingle way from camp, join it there and walk a couple of kilometres, but you can also possibly get through to one of the fields that's running off here on the right. I think actually just coming up at this particular spot. It looks fantastic. It's not even marked on Google Earth, but you will find an entry for it in the National Monuments database. And if I remember correctly, yes, it's Killelton Church. So if you look up Killelton Church, you'll find that out. And then if you have a look at Google Maps and kind of zoom around a bit, about 2.5 kilometres northeast of camp, along the old rail trail, I think you can sort of see that on the satellite map as well. In amongst some woods, you will see that there. So that there's quite an elaborate adventure if you fancy getting off and doing that. I'm intending to try and get to it next time I'm doing this particular trip. I'm certainly coming back down here. There are quite a few areas that I have missed out, even though we seem to have seen plenty and we have a lot of tales. So for this section, we have now joined the National Road. I am cycling this on a Sunday morning. It's sort of time you might hope it would be quiet enough, but as you can see, there is a fair amount of traffic on it. This road, I think, is always busy. I've cycled it the opposite direction from Tralee in an evening, and not only is it busy, but as you can see, there's no hard shoulder. Once you get to camp, you're then on the National Road, so that's picking up most of all the traffic coming up from Dingle, and it gets very busy. You get a lot of camper vans on it, and even on this Sunday morning, when you think it might be quiet, you're getting this, and in fact much worse. When I stopped there a minute ago, there was a constant stream for about a minute or two. Really not very pleasant, but it's unavoidable because there is no other road. There's the mountain there, there's the sea here, and this is all that's between it. There's no hard shoulder. I think the speed limit is either 80 or 100. I've had, I'd say, 3 quite close passes in the last 20 minutes. So yeah, you kind of are just grinning and bearing this till you get there. Blenhevel, which is where I'm hoping things will improve again. Yeah, there's some poor driving basically. I mean, because I have the camera mounted on the handlebars, and I think quite a lot of drivers see it, what I'll frequently say is somebody passes me very closely and then suddenly swerves out afterwards, and I presume that's because they spotted the camera. And with some of those close passes, they feel like punishment passes. But anyway, that's an idea of how bad the traffic is in this road. Now, although I say there isn't any alternative, that's true at the moment. Looking at the map, the Dingle Way is running on the right-hand side, maybe 500 metres back. It looks like it's probably following an old rail line, as I said. Now, I know you can't cycle it really at the moment. People have tried and said it's just too rough in sections. But it does suggest that it might be possible, and I hope the council hear this, to put in a cycle route or a greenway up there and enable cyclists to bypass this one section of road. It's 10 to 15 kilometres and it is absolutely terrible. It's very unpleasant to cycle, and really it means that there isn't any safe route onto the Dingle Peninsula, because the regional road on the other side is also pretty terrible. Where once you get further down, traffic lightens off enough that it is not so bad. So certainly if I don't know if it's Tralee Council or Kerry Council would be responsible, and looking to boost tourist numbers, and particularly your kind of off-season tourist numbers that you get around cycle touring. We tend not to cycle at the height of summer, but at either end of it, putting in a greenway up there would make a lot of sense. If you're thinking of doing this route yourself, frankly, this is one of the very few spots where I would actually consider just getting a taxi and skipping that 15 kilometres. We're coming into Brandonville here. This is the old site of a ford over the river, but there's been a bridge here since I think about 1780. There's also a very impressive windmill which has now been restored and is a little museum you can visit, and it's the end of the ship canal that comes from Tralee, and I'll talk about that more in the next video. So this is about the 8th video of my sequence as we head from Kenmare to Limerick City along Eurovelo 1. Check the playlist for the other ones. If you've cycled this yourself, you might have some comments to fill in on the information I've given here, or if you've any questions, post them and I'll have a look, read those questions and respond to you in the comments. The comments are worth reading in general for my videos. Anyway, hopefully this encourages you to consider getting out the bike, following this route perhaps, and perhaps someday I shall see you on the road.